Hi everyone, welcome to my Illusion of Life Folio 2 presentation. So in these presentations, I'm exploring ways seeing stillness and rhythm in subtle motion. At the start of this presentation, I will give a little bit extract of my experiment and with some related works. Then I will show my weekly experiments and give some self-reflections. So my intention towards my Folio 2 iteration is to keep investigate how the nature objects and human move and interact in a particular environment to create a sense of calming pace, but more concerning on a clearer direction of living stillness in calming background scenes. So this direction of practice is more expanded through my studio project aiming to investigate a living cafe in several illustrated images, while I think it can relate to the key term of living stillness behind the illustration itself. In my Folio 2 iteration, I will conduct a series of refined scenes which happens in our normal life, and I will perform it in a more spirit way. And through those illustrations, I will mainly experiment on some subtle motion of different elements in the scene and the engagement towards rhythm behind that movement. And one of the key elements in those background illustrations is a cup of coffee in some aspect, reflecting on my studio cafe context, but involving it into my experiments to engage with other elements in the scene. So one of the related work is still logical ASMR animations that I showed in Folio 1 presentation. And also another one is a new Japanese fantasy film called My Neighbor Totoro. Also, this film shows a really beautiful friendship interactions, and it is featured as a sentimental masterpiece which captures some childhood and explores the theme of living pleasure and also the environmentalism as well. So connecting my experiment direction to those beautiful works, I find many of those animated background scenes in those works all present a comfortable rhythm through a series of some subtle movements and arrangements towards some theme elements. So this discovery guides me to focus my weekly experiments on the subtle movements and rhythm in those subtle movements. I also gain some inspiration in some context and narrative as well. Through those animated works, I found they perform a series of some naive and joyful scenes in a fairy tale world. This leads me to discover and create my own naive and joyful scene, but more concerning on exploring the mythical moments in our daily life. And coffee is involved in everything I have created. Based on previous inspirations, I start my weekly experiment for my Folio 2 iterations. In week 7 and 8, I create the scene 1 and animations, and in week 9, I did some additional tests on coffee iterations itself. And in week 10 and 11, I experiment on scene 2, and at the end of the week 12, I experiment on scene 3. And the first scene in week 7 and 8 is called Night and Tranquility. I painted in studio pen and colored with some watercolor brush. This scene demonstrates one of our best wishes towards the midnight when we look out of the window and opens up our own imaginations towards people inside of the far apartment. I firstly experiment with the animations on the stars. I tried to actually animate the opacities to create a shiny motion, and I separated them and to animate them in 4 groups, and then I combined them together to test the whole result. So through this experiment, I think it can build up a disordered rhythm of shining stars all over the sky. I find it creates a good effects on the coming magic sky. Then I create another layer opacity animation on animating lights. So this light animations works well and achieves a good contribution to maintain a living stillness. And in terms of the coffee animations in this scene, I created coffee turning into fireworks, as I think coffee animation can go very real, like steam spoiling, but it can go very abstract as well. And finally, I mix those animations together to test their interactions. I found some light animations pairing with stars create a basic magic mood, but and those elements can somehow rely on each other. but I may need some further experiment on coffee animation itself and also the human subtle movements inside the apartment. So in week 9, so in week 8, I reiterated this thing, and I test some human subtle movements, and I rearrange the scene layout to really test the human subtle movements of the female characters inside this scene. I also reiterated with some stars animations. I try to animate them in different scales, and I actually found it animating them in different scales could result in a better outcome of a hazy magical sky. And these some are the tests that I did with the human subtle movements inside the apartment of some typing, hugging, kissing, and hand gestures, and also coffee drinking as well. This subtle motion works well to support the relaxing, beautiful atmosphere of the scene, and combine those reiterations together, and I add sound effects to them. According to my class lecturer's feedback of some subtle motion being too far to discovery, I had better pull in to create camera animations. I take this advice as a very important consideration in my further experiment. And my week 9 experiment, I go back on coffee itself and reiterate it with itself with some additional animations. I animated the coffee liquid textures and find a slowed down version of coffee poured into the cup can build up a calming, relaxing pace. And I animated some light changes and pouring into the cup animations as well. And then I refine these animations with a final refined animations of the coffee steams with some bubbles boiling, also the light as well. My next week for 10 and 11 animation is I build another new scenes, and it is called A Beautiful Windy Day. I painted in Calypso paint. Comparing my scene 1 experiment, this is more focused on environmental subtle motion with more attention on motion quality. I experimented with the subtle motions of the books flipping over a little bit, and I experimented with the subtle motion of leaf fluttering outside the windows. Here I find this one's test works well and more smoother. I tested another refined coffee steaming motions as well to refine. I regard it as a third reiteration of the coffee steaming animations, and then I paired them together and I test the overall moving rhythm of those elements. I guide the audience attention from inside office towards outside window, then back to the office again. This is an interesting experiment, and it actually gives a good pause for the audience to gaze at those things. And as I a little bit run out of time, I'm gonna show my scene 3 experiments on the supportive document. In these iterations, I explore the long way to test the scene's elements engagement, but overall the motion qualities could be more improved, and also I could try to create more variation on the subtle motions and other elements in the scenes. This is my presentations. Thank you guys for listening.